October 14, 1943, 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. Captain Don Blakeslee, leader of the 4th Fighter Group, leveled his P-47 Thunderbolt and scanned the horizon. Below him, 316 B-17 flying fortresses were pushing toward Germany's vital ball-bearing factories. Around them, over 300 German fighters circled and attacked like predators closing in on their target. Blakeslee glanced at his fuel gauge. Only 20 minutes left before he'd have to turn back. The bombers, though, still had 3 long hours to make a home to England. The math was grim. The Thunderbolt could only escort bombers about 250 miles into Germany before running out of range, forcing the fighters to leave the bombers exposed for the rest of the trip. That day, 60 B-17s and 600 airmen would be lost. As Blakeslee gave the reluctant order to head back, leaving hundreds of bombers to face the Luftwaffe alone, he sent a message that would echo through Air Force Command. We need a fighter that can go all the way to Berlin and back. Until we have one, we're sending these bomber boys to die. What he didn't know was that such a fighter already existed. Ignored and collecting dust in a hangar at Wright Field, Ohio, the Army Air Forces had written off as inferior and unworthy of production. Official tests had dismissed it as underperforming compared to current American designs. But 5 months earlier, at a Rolls-Royce facility in England, a mechanic named Ronald Harker had done something completely against the rules. Without permission, he took the American-built fighter for a test flight. He immediately saw potential others had missed and wrote a report that defied official evaluations. His actions violated every rule in the book. He wasn't even authorized to suggest changes to foreign aircraft. Still, Harker had realized what everyone else had overlooked. The P-51 Mustang, thought to be just an average low-altitude fighter, could become something extraordinary with one key change, replacing its American Allison engine with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin. That single modification would change the course of air combat forever. The Mustang story had begun 2 years earlier, in 1941. Britain, fighting alone against Nazi Germany, desperately needed new fighters. The Spitfire was excellent but slow to produce, and the Hurricane was already outdated. British officials turned to North American aviation for help, asking the company to build the P-40 Warhawk under license. North American's President James Dutch Kindleberger made a bold offer. Instead of copying an old design, his team could build a brand-new fighter from scratch in the same amount of time. The British agreed, giving the company just 120 days to produce a prototype. Chief Engineer Edgar Schmud and his team got to work. What they created was the NA-73, later named the Mustang. It featured advanced aerodynamics and cutting-edge engineering for its time. A special laminar flow wing reduced drag, while a rear-mounted radiator used a merited effect, turning heat into added thrust instead of slowing the plane down. The fuselage was designed with precise mathematical models and built using automobile-style production methods for speed and efficiency. The prototype flew on October 26, 1940, just 117 days after design began, even beating the impossible deadline by 3 days. Early test flights were impressive. 380 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, smooth handling, and excellent range thanks to large internal fuel tanks and the option for external ones. The British immediately placed orders, and by mid-1941, RAF squadrons were flying their first Mustangs. But there was one major problem: the engine. The Allison V-1710 worked well at low and medium altitudes, but lost power above 15,000 feet. At 25,000 feet, where most air battles happened, performance dropped sharply. The Mustang became sluggish and slow, unable to keep up with high-flying German fighters. Because of this flaw, the RAF limited the Mustang to low-altitude ground attacks and reconnaissance missions. The U.S. Army Air Forces tested it too and reached the same disappointing conclusion. The aircraft potential seemed wasted until Ronald Harker and a Merlin engine changed everything. Even though the Mustang had great range and handled beautifully at low altitudes, U.S. officials rejected it for high-altitude combat. Their report stated that while the aircraft performed well below 15,000 feet, it lost too much power above that point, making it unfit to escort bombers or fight modern European aircraft flying at 25,000 feet and higher. They recommended the plane only for low-level attack and reconnaissance missions. By mid-1942, the Mustang looked like it would become just another forgotten design, impressive in concept but limited by its weak engine. It was still being built for British and a few American orders, but North American aviation began shifting focus to other projects like the B-25 Mitchell bomber. Then, on April 30th, 1943, something unexpected happened. Ronald Harker, a 30-year-old Rolls-Royce test pilot and engine expert, made a bold decision that would rewrite aviation history. Harker wasn't a combat pilot. He worked at the Rolls-Royce test facility in Hucknall, England, where his job was to evaluate engines and report performance data to company engineers. He had no authority to test or modify American planes. Yet that day, while visiting an RAF base at Duxford, he was offered a chance to fly a Mustang. The squadron commander casually mentioned that the plane was fast and agile below 15,000 feet, but useless above that. Curious, Harker took the Mustang up for a short flight. What was supposed to be a routine test quickly turned into a revelation. The plane's frame was incredible, aerodynamic, stable, and smooth. Everything felt right, except the power plant. As an engine specialist, Harker knew instantly what that meant. He was deeply familiar with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same one powering Britain's Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Lancasters. The Merlin had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that kept its power strong even past 30,000 feet. Where the Allison engine struggled for air, the Merlin thrived. At high altitude, it delivered over 1,400 horsepower, far more than the Allison's 1,000. Flying back to base, Harker had a simple but revolutionary idea. Combine the Mustang's advanced airframe with the Merlin's high-altitude power. That combination, he realized, could create a fighter with unmatched speed, range, and performance at every height. As soon as he landed, Harker broke protocol. Without permission from Rolls-Royce management, the RAF, or the U.S. authorities, he wrote a detailed report recommending that the Mustang be fitted with a Merlin engine. Dated May 3, 1943, his report read, "The Mustang airframe is superior to any fighter in service today. Its only limitation is the Allison engine's poor high-altitude power. Installing the Merlin engine will combine the Mustang's range and agility with high-altitude strength, producing a fighter that outperforms everything now flying." He sent the report to Air Vice Marshal Sir Wilfred Freeman, who immediately grasped its potential. Freeman knew acting on it would be politically sensitive. The Americans had already rejected the Mustang, and suggesting they were wrong could strain relations. But he also knew the war came first. He passed the report to Britain's Ministry of Aircraft Production with a note. "This may be the most important recommendation I'll see this year. We must pursue it despite diplomatic challenges." What Harker and Freeman didn't realize was that across the Atlantic, engineers at the Packard Motor Company, Rolls-Royce's U.S. partner, were already thinking along the same lines. Even at Wright Field, a few American engineers have been quietly pushing for the same engine swap, only to be blocked by layers of bureaucracy. The idea was alive, but the fight to make it happen had just begun. A few engineers had already tossed around the idea of swapping the Mustang's engine, but official channels had dismissed it again and again. Each argument sounded reasonable on its own, but together they nearly killed one of history's greatest fighter aircraft. The first issue was politics. The Allison engine was American, and the Merlin was British, and pride mattered. U.S. military policy favored home-built engines in home-built planes. Second, Britain didn't have enough Merlin engines even for its own aircraft. Diverting any to American fighters could slow Spitfire and Lancaster production. Third, redesigning a plane to fit a new engine required time, money, and manpower, and why waste those resources on a model that had already been rejected? But the biggest roadblock was bureaucracy. The U.S. had already committed to the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning as its main fighters. Changing course now would mean admitting those earlier decisions might have been wrong, something military bureaucracies rarely do. By spring 1943, however, the situation in Europe had become impossible to ignore. American bombers were being torn apart on long-range missions into Germany. The P-47 fought well, but couldn't fly far enough. The P-38 could go the distance, but broke down often in Europe's cold, damp climate. Neither could stay with the bombers to their targets and back. Losses were devastating, and a new solution was urgently needed. That's when Air Vice Marshal Sir Wilfred Freeman stepped in. He officially reached out to the U.S. Army Air Forces, suggesting that a test of a Merlin-powered Mustang could be worth trying. The American response was polite but dismissive. A memo from Wright Field dated May 22nd noted the suggestion, but said the U.S. was already committed to the P-47 and P-38 for escort missions, modifying a plane they'd already rejected as unsuitable for high-altitude combat. It said, would be an inefficient use of resources. But Freeman had one advantage. Rolls-Royce wasn't waiting for permission. Quietly and without authorization, engineers at their Hucknall facility had already begun work on a Mustang conversion. They pulled the Allison engine from Mustang Mark I, serial number AL975, and started fitting it with a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61. Technically, this was a serious breach of protocol. The plane belonged to the RAF under the U.S. Lend-Lease program, meaning it couldn't legally be altered without American approval. But Freeman gave a discreet green light, and the engineers went ahead. The job was far from simple. The Merlin was larger and more powerful, so the engine mounts, cowling, and cooling system had to be redesigned. A new propeller was fitted, and the fuel system was adjusted to handle the increased output. After 4 months of intense work, the modified aircraft, now called the Mustang Mark X, was ready for flight testing. On October 13, 1943, Ronald Harker took the plane into the air. At 25,000 feet, he opened the throttle, and the results were astonishing. The new Mustang hit 430 miles per hour, a full 70 miles faster than the Allison version. It climbed faster, handled just as smoothly, and kept its excellent range. The Merlin's fuel efficiency meant the Mustang could still travel remarkable distances, while now performing brilliantly at high altitude. In his October 15th report, Harker wrote, "The Merlin Mustang is the best fighter aircraft I've ever flown at any altitude. It outperforms the Spitfire Mark IX above 20,000 feet and has more than twice the range. It should go into production immediately." Within days, RAF pilots confirmed his findings. Squadron leader Michael Robinson, a decorated ace with 12 victories, stated, "I've flown Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Thunderbolts in combat. The Merlin Mustang outmatches them all above 15,000 feet and equals them below. Most importantly, its range is 3 times that of Spitfire. This is the escort fighter we've been waiting for." That unauthorized engine swap had just rewritten the rules of air combat. Before we continue, if you enjoy true stories of innovation, courage, and the people behind history's breakthroughs, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Your support helps us keep bringing you well-researched military stories that show how human decisions shape technology and warfare. Now, let's see what happened when the Americans finally realized what one British test pilot had already proven. The British results couldn't be ignored. By November 1943, detailed performance data from the Merlin Mustang had reached U.S. commanders, and the numbers shocked them. The aircraft could fly over 2,000 miles with drop tanks, hit 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, and reach altitudes over 41,000 feet. These weren't estimates or prototypes. They were verified test results from a flying plane. When General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, saw the data, his reaction was swift and decisive. On November 8, 1943, General Henry Hap Arnold issued a direct order to North American Aviation: convert 2 P-51s to use the Merlin engine immediately, run full performance tests, and send the results directly to my office. But Arnold's command only confirmed what North American engineers were already doing. While Rolls-Royce in England had secretly completed its own conversion, North American had been quietly preparing their own version in collaboration with Packard, the American company licensed to build Merlin engines for British aircraft. Edgar Schmud, the Mustang's chief designer, had seen this coming. From the start, he'd built the P-51's airframe with extra space and flexibility, knowing the Allison engine might someday need to be replaced. So, when Packard showed North American samples of its U.S.-built Merlin engines in the summer of 1943, Schmud immediately began designing a version of the Mustang around it. The Packard-built Merlin, known as the V-1650, was nearly identical to the British original, but made with American tooling and standards. Since Packard was already producing thousands of these engines for export to Britain, using them in U.S. aircraft avoided the earlier problem of supply shortages. By November 1943, two prototype conversions, designated an A-102 and an A-103, were ready. On November 30th, company test pilot Robert Chilton took the first American-built Merlin Mustang into the air. His flight report matched what the British had already proven. The aircraft performed superbly at every altitude, outclassing every American fighter either in service or still under development. The prototypes were sent to Wright Field in early December for official testing. The same engineers who once rejected the Mustang now faced data that was impossible to deny. At 25,000 feet, the Merlin-powered P-51 was 40 miles per hour faster than the P-47 Thunderbolt and 55 miles per hour faster than the P-38 Lightning. It could outclimb both above 15,000 feet and still fly much farther. Even without drop tanks, its range reached 850 miles, compared to 475 for the P-47 and 525 for the P-38. When range was measured in terms of combat radius, how far it could escort bombers into enemy territory, the numbers were even more dramatic. The P-47 could reach about 250 miles into Germany, far enough for Ruhr targets but nowhere near Berlin. The P-38 stretched that to 300 miles. The Merlin Mustang, now designated the P-51B, could escort bombers more than 650 miles on internal fuel alone. And with two 75-gallon drop tanks, its range extended to 800 miles, enough to reach Berlin, and return to England with fuel left for a dogfight. On December 20th, 1943, General Arnold gave the order that changed everything. Full-scale production of the P-51B. Every new Mustang would receive a Merlin engine, and Allison-powered production would end. North American's main plant in Inglewood, California, would build the P-51B, while a new facility in Dallas, Texas, would produce an identical version designated the P-51C. By the spring of 1944, more than 400 Mustangs were rolling out of factories every month. The first P-51B Mustangs reached England in December 1943 and were assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, soon nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group. At first, many pilots were skeptical. Compared to the massive Thunderbolt, the Mustang looked small and fragile. It had only one engine, unlike the P-38's two, and just 6.50 caliber machine guns instead of the P-47's 8. But their doubts vanished the moment they took it into combat. On December 5, 1943, the group flew its first mission, escorting bombers over Amiens, France. The Mustangs climbed faster than the bombers they were protecting and cruised easily above them, weaving back and forth without burning excess fuel. When German fighters appeared, the Mustangs dived with breathtaking speed, closing in so fast that Luftwaffe pilots were caught off guard. Lieutenant Charles Chuck Gum flew his first Mustang mission that day. When two FW-190s broke through to attack the bombers, he dove from 28,000 feet, reaching over 500 miles per hour. The Germans assumed it was AP-47 making a single high-speed pass, but Gum stayed with them through turns and climbs, something no Thunderbolt could do. He shot down both fighters, climbed back to bomber altitude, and still had plenty of fuel left. His after-action report said it best. The P-51 does everything the P-47 does, plus it stays with the bombers all the way home. This changes everything. By January 1944, more fighter groups were switching to Mustangs. The 357th received theirs in February. In March, the 4th Fighter Group, led by none other than Don Blakeslee, the same man who had begged for long-range escorts after Schweinfurt, converted to the P-51. Every pilot who flew it came to the same conclusion. This was a fighter that would turn the air war around. The Mustang wasn't just better in a few areas. It was better in nearly every way. The numbers proved it. In January and February 1944, P-51 squadrons achieved an astounding 11-to-1 kill ratio against German fighters. The 47 Thunderbolt, already considered a powerhouse, averaged 7-1. The P-38 Lightning managed about 5-1. The Mustang's mix of speed, range, and agility was unmatched. German pilots who had learned how to counter P-47s and P-38s suddenly found themselves facing something entirely new. Major Gunther Rahl, one of the Luftwaffe's top aces with more than 200 victories, mostly earned on the Eastern Front, encountered the new P-51s in March 1944. In his after-action report, he admitted the new American fighter is superior to our aircraft in nearly every performance category. It is faster, climbs better, has greater range, and handles beautifully. Our only advantages are heavier cannon armament and experience. But those advantages are fading as their pilot quality improves, and our veterans are lost faster than we can replace them. The strategic impact. The Mustang's arrival in large numbers changed the entire nature of the air war. Before it entered service, daylight bombing runs deep into Germany were a gamble. Losses of 5 to 10% per mission were common. At that rate, bomber crews faced almost certain death or capture before finishing their 25 mission tours. With Mustang escorts flying alongside them all the way to the target and back, those numbers fell dramatically. During the first raids on Berlin in March 1944, the first daylight attacks on the German capital, bomber losses dropped to under 4%, even against Germany's most seasoned fighter wings. For the first time, bombers could strike the heart of Nazi industry in daylight and return home in force. But the Mustang's effect went far beyond bomber protection. General James Doolittle, who took command of the 8th Air Force in January 1944, issued a simple but revolutionary order: destroy the German Air Force, anywhere, anytime. Until then, Allied fighters had stayed close to bomber formations, defending them reactively. Doolittle changed everything. Mustang groups, with their extraordinary range, were now ordered to hunt. They flew ahead of the bombers to ambush German interceptors before they could form up. They broke formation to chase targets of opportunity. And with fuel to spare, they began strafing airfields, destroying enemy aircraft on the ground before they ever took off. By the spring of 1944, German command reports reflected growing desperation. A Luftwaffe directive dated March 28 warned, American fighters with very long range, identified as the P-51 Mustang, now accompany bomber formations throughout their missions. These aircraft outperform our Bf 109G and FW-190 in models above 6,000 meters. Pilots are instructed to avoid prolonged combat with P-51s whenever possible. Attack the bombers quickly and disengage before escorts can respond. But disengaging was far easier said than done. The Mustang matched or surpassed German fighters in nearly every aspect except one: slightly higher diving speed. In climbs, turns, and acceleration, it was equal or better. To reach the bombers, German pilots had to fight through squadrons of Mustangs, and that fight rarely went in their favor. The statistics from the spring and summer of 1944 told the story. In March, the 8th Air Force lost 131 bombers. In April, that number dropped to 70. By May, it fell again to 61, and in June, only 42 were lost. Every month, as more Mustang groups entered combat, bomber losses declined and Allied fighter victories rose. The Luftwaffe was being bled dry in a relentless war of attrition it couldn't win. American factories were producing fighters faster than Germany could replace them. U.S. flight schools were turning out new pilots at a rate the Luftwaffe couldn't match. Meanwhile, the Allied surviving pilots were becoming battle-hardened, while Germany's most experienced aces were dying one by one. By the time the Allies launched the D-Day invasion in June 1944, the balance of power in the skies had completely shifted. Allied air dominance was absolute. On June 6, the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties, barely a fraction compared to 14,000 flown by Allied aircraft that day. High above Normandy, squadrons of P-51s patrolled relentlessly, ensuring German fighters never reached the beaches in force. By late summer 1944, the once formidable Luftwaffe day fighter arm was effectively broken. The P-51 Mustang had done what no other aircraft could. It cleared the skies over Europe. Even after the Luftwaffe's collapse, German fighters still flew missions. They still scored occasional victories. But strategically, the air war was over. They could no longer defend German cities from daylight bombing. They couldn't protect ground troops from Allied advances. And they couldn't replace their growing losses fast enough to remain effective. The Mustang, the aircraft once dismissed as unsuitable, had become the weapon that gave the Allies total air superiority over Europe. The P-51 quickly became the aircraft of choice for America's top fighter pilots. Major George Preddy scored 26.8 victories, making him the highest-scoring Mustang ace. Major John Meyer achieved 24 kills in his P-51. Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, already an ace from his days flying P-47 Thunderbolts, added 6.5 more victories in a Mustang. Captain Chuck Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier, scored 11.5 kills in Mustangs, including 5 in a single day on October 12, 1944. But what pilots loved most about the P-51 went beyond the statistics. Its visibility was unmatched thanks to a clear bubble canopy offering full 360-degree vision. Its controls were light and precise, making it agile yet stable in gunfire. And unlike many high-performance fighters, it forgave mistakes. It was a rare aircraft that could make an average pilot better and bring home even the reckless ones alive. Major George Preddy described it best in an interview just weeks before his death in December 1944. The Mustang does everything well. It's fast, climbs hard, turns tight, and stays in the air for hours. Other fighters might beat it in one thing or another, but none combine everything like this one does. If a Mustang pilot knows what he's doing, you can't trap him. He can break away from a bad fight, regroup, and come back when he has the advantage. That's what makes it deadly. Reliability was another reason pilots trusted the Mustang with their lives. The Packard-built Merlin engine was sturdy and easy to maintain. The airframe could take punishment that would have destroyed most other fighters. Key systems were designed with redundancy, backups that kept the plane controllable even after severe damage. Captain Donald Lopez, who flew 70 combat missions in Mustangs, recalled returning from one sortie with 67 holes in his aircraft. One aileron and the rudder were hit. The plane flew like it was angry, but it flew. Any other fighter would have been uncontrollable. The Mustang just took it and brought me home. If you've been enjoying this deep look at how one bold act of innovation created the fighter that won the air war over Europe, make sure to subscribe and share. We focus on the stories behind the machines, where human choices and engineering genius meet on the battlefield. The P-51B and C models that appeared in early 1944 were remarkable, but North American kept improving the design. The next step was the P-51D, which entered production in March 1944. The D model introduced a sleek bubble canopy for unmatched visibility, replacing the old frame version. Firepower increased to 6.50 caliber machine guns, up from 4. A new gun sight and aerodynamic refinements pushed its top speed to 447 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. The P-51D became the definitive version of a Mustang. A total of 9,823 were built, and by late 1944, it equipped nearly all frontline fighter groups of the 8th and 9th Air Forces. In the final months of the war, it ruled the skies over Europe. The last major wartime evolution was the P-51H, the lightest, fastest Mustang ever built. Using thinner wing skins, a refined structure, and a powerful Packard Merlin V1650-9 engine with water injection, the H model could reach 487 miles per hour, but it arrived too late. Production began in February 1945, and only 555 were completed before the war ended. Most never saw combat. The P-51D remained a mainstay through victory, and long after. It was fast enough to challenge even Germany's new jet, the Me-262. While the jet was quicker in level flight and carried heavy cannon armament, it was vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Mustang pilots learned to patrol near German jet bases, catching them as they climbed or descended. In the air, speed couldn't save them if they never got off the runway. Production figures told the story of the Mustang's impact. Across all variants, 15,575 Mustangs were built, roughly half of them P-51DS. Production peaked in March 1945 at 550 aircraft per month. For comparison, total P-47 Thunderbolt production reached 15,683, and the P-38 Lightning totaled 10,037. The Mustang nearly matched the Thunderbolt's numbers despite entering mass production 2 years later. And when it came to combat performance, the Mustang didn't just keep up, it led. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe still existed on paper. Its pilots still flew, and sometimes they even won a fight or two. But strategically, Germany had already lost the skies. Its fighters could no longer protect cities from daylight bombing or support the army on the ground. Production couldn't keep up with losses. The once rejected P-51 Mustang had become the very weapon that secured Allied air dominance over Europe. The Mustang soon became the aircraft every top American ace wanted to fly. Major George Preddy scored 26.8 victories, making him the leading Mustang ace of the war. Major John Meyer followed with 24. Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, already an ace in P-47 Thunderbolts, added 6.5 more kills in Mustangs. Captain Chuck Yeager, later the first man to break the sound barrier, shot down 11.5 enemy aircraft in his P-51, including 5 in one day on October 12, 1944. Pilots adored the Mustang, not just for its performance, but for how it felt. The bubble canopy offered a perfect 360-degree view. The controls were light and precise, giving total confidence in combat. It handled smoothly, stayed steady as a gun platform, and forgave mistakes that would have doomed pilots in other planes. Major George Preddy summed it up shortly before his death in December 1944. The Mustang does everything well. It's fast, climbs strong, turns tight, and can stay up for hours. Other fighters might beat it in one area, but the Mustang competes in every one. A good pilot can always break off, regroup, and come back on his terms. That's what makes it deadly. Reliability was another strength rarely mentioned in statistics. The Packard-built Merlin engine was tough and easy to maintain. The airframe could take astonishing punishment and still get pilots home. Captain Donald Lopez once returned from a mission with 67 bullet holes in his plane, including hits to one aileron and the rudder. The Mustang flew like it was angry, he said, but it flew. Any other fighter would have been uncontrollable. The P-51B and C versions that entered service in early 1944 were outstanding, but North American kept improving them. The next evolution, the P-51D, rolled off production lines in March 1944. It introduced a clear bubble canopy that gave pilots unmatched visibility, replaced the earlier frame cockpit, and carried 6.50 caliber machine guns instead of 4. A better gun sight and subtle aerodynamic refinements pushed top speed to 447 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. The P-51D became the definitive Mustang. A total of 9,823 were built, equipping most 8th and 9th Air Force squadrons by late 1944. It completely dominated European skies. The final wartime version, the P-51H, was even lighter and faster, using thinner wing skins, refined structure, and a new 1,900 horsepower Packard Merlin V1650-9 engine with water injection. It reached 487 miles per hour, the fastest Mustang ever, but arrived too late. Production began in February 1945, and only 555 were completed before the war ended. Most never saw combat. Even so, the P-51D remained the standard fighter to the end of the war, and long afterward. It was agile enough to threaten even Germany's Me-262 jet. Though the jet was faster in level flight, Mustang pilots learned to patrol near enemy airfields and catch the Me-262s during takeoff or landing, when they were most vulnerable. In combat, the Mustang's record spoke louder than any speech. P-51 units claimed 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, and roughly 4,000 more on the ground during strafing attacks. Nearly 9,000 total. No other American fighter type came close. Of the 15,575 Mustangs built, about 2,520 were lost in combat, a loss rate of just 16%, lower than any other major U.S. fighter. The P-47 Thunderbolt's loss rate was 23%, the P-38 Lightning's around 18%. The Mustang's numbers reflected not only superior performance, but also the collapse of German defenses and the aircraft's remarkable ability to bring its pilots home. The P-51 Mustang continued to serve long after the guns of Europe fell silent. It fought again in Korea as a precision ground attack aircraft. Through the 1950s and 60s, Mustangs flew in the air forces of dozens of nations, and some remained in limited service into the 1980s. Today, more than 150 Mustangs still fly, their polished wings glinting in the sunlight at air shows around the world. Audiences hear the unmistakable growl of the Merlin engine and see the elegant lines of Edgar Schmud's design. But what they're really witnessing is the living legacy of one man's defiance. That man was Ronald Harker, the Rolls-Royce test pilot who, in April 1943, broke the rules and flew an American fighter without authorization. His report contradicted official findings and ignored the chain of command. By all rights, it should have ended his career. Instead, it changed history. Harker's insight that combining the British Merlin engine with the American Mustang airframe would create something extraordinary led to the fighter that won control of the skies. His story proved that true innovation often comes from the ground up, not from bureaucracy above. The P-51 Mustang's legacy is more than just engineering excellence. It represents what happens when courage, creativity, and collaboration overcome politics and pride. Designed in just 120 days, rejected by procurement officials, saved by one unauthorized test flight, the Mustang became America's deadliest fighter. It destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other U.S. plane, made long-range bombing possible, and gave the Allies the air superiority needed for D-Day and ultimate victory. Colonel Don Blakeslee, the same commander who once begged for a fighter that could escort bombers to Berlin, led his group through the end of the war in Mustangs. His pilots destroyed more than 580 enemy aircraft, the highest total of any group in the 8th Air Force. After the war, Blakeslee summed up the Mustang's importance simply. We had courage, we had numbers, we had factories, but we didn't have a right tool until the Mustang arrived. Once we did, everything changed. We stopped surviving missions and started winning the war. In less than a year, the Mustang went from a discarded idea to the most feared fighter in the sky. From Ronald Harker's unauthorized flight in April 1943 to Allied dominance by spring 1944, just 12 months, the world of aerial warfare was transformed. The story of the P-51 Mustang reminds us that the best ideas often come from those closest to the work, not those furthest up the chain. It shows that questioning authority, when done in pursuit of truth, can change the world, and that sometimes breaking the rules is what victory demands. In the words of one German soldier who faced him in 1945, "By then we knew the war was lost, but the Mustangs made it clear. They were everywhere all the time, at every altitude. When we saw them overhead, we knew the sky no longer belonged to us." Today, each time a restored Mustang takes to the air, its engine's roar carries the sound of innovation, courage, and one man's decision to act when others said no. The P-51 Mustang, born from desperation, dismissed by bureaucracy, saved by a mechanic who broke the rules, became the fighter that changed the course of World War II, escorting bombers to Berlin and back, and proving once and for all that vision and courage can triumph over red tape. Sometimes, history turns not on policy, but on a single unauthorized test flight, and the man who dared to take it.